Keanu Reeves stepped into the dimly lit KFC, the scent of fried chicken blending with the quiet hum of the soda machines, dressed in a simple black hoodie and jeans. He looked like any other exhausted customer grabbing a late-night meal. The restaurant was nearly empty, just a few employees cleaning up, a couple chatting near the window, and two little girls sitting alone. Each time someone walked past, they flinched slightly, as if expecting something bad to happen. Keanu frowned. It was late. Too late for two young children to be sitting alone in a fast food restaurant. Something was wrong. What happens next will shock you. This is a story of mystery, danger, and an unexpected hero stepping in when no one else would. Before we continue this story, let us know where you're watching from. And if you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another special story for you. The city never truly slept. Keanu felt it every time he wrapped up a long day of filming and wandered the streets of Los Angeles. The crowds thinned, the noise softened, but life never completely disappeared. Cars still hummed in the distance, neon lights flickered, and restaurants closed their doors one by one, but the night still had its own rhythm. He didn't usually eat fast food, but tonight he just wanted something quick, simple, and uncomplicated. That's how, just before midnight, he found himself stepping into a nearly empty KFC. The place was quiet. A couple sat by the window. A lone employee wiped down the tables absent-mindedly, and the manager counted cash behind the counter. Keanu placed his order, grabbed his drink, and took a seat toward the back. He let out a slow breath, closing his eyes for a moment, feeling the exhaustion settle into his shoulders. But then something caught his attention. There were two children sitting at the far this table, two young girls no older than 7. They both wore pink Barbie shirts, slightly worn, and clutched a crumpled piece of paper tightly in their hands. But what stood out the most was the fact that they weren't eating. No fries, no drinks, nothing. They just sat there, staring at the door as if they were waiting for someone. A quiet alarm went off in Keanu's mind. He wasn't the type to get involved in strangers' affairs, but something about these girls felt wrong, very wrong. Every time an employee passed near them, the girls seemed to shrink back slightly as if afraid of being noticed. Keanu observed in silence. He didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe their parents were in the bathroom, maybe they had gone to grab something from the car. But as the minutes passed and no one showed up, that uneasy feeling in his chest only grew. He was about to let it go. Who was he to interfere? But then it happened. The younger girl, who couldn't have been older than 6, rubbed her eyes with the sleeve of her pink shirt, and Keanu realized she was crying. In that moment, he knew he couldn't just walk away. Keanu is about to ignore the situation. Something inside him tells him he can't just leave. Keanu didn't want to scare them. He was well aware of the weight his presence carried. No matter how much he tried to blend in, people often recognized him. But these girls weren't looking at him with curiosity or excitement. They were afraid. He took a slow breath, grabbed his drink, and walked toward their table with calm, measured steps. "Hey there, everything okay?" His voice was soft and friendly. He lowered himself slightly, keeping a safe distance so he wouldn't seem imposing. The girls didn't answer. The older one, around 7 or 8 years old, lowered her gaze and gripped the crumpled paper even tighter, while the younger one shrank back, clutching her sister's arm like it was the only thing keeping her safe. Keanu immediately understood they didn't trust him, and from the looks of it, they didn't trust anyone here. Keanu looked around. The KFC remained quiet, but something about the atmosphere felt off. The manager stood at the counter watching the girls, not with surprise as if he had just noticed them, but with a look that said he already knew. In the kitchen, 2 employees whispered among themselves. One of them glanced toward the girls before quickly looking away. They knew something, but for some reason, no one was doing anything. Keanu clenched his jaw, resisting the urge to demand answers right then and there. But if there was one thing he knew about scared children, it was that you don't earn their trust by pushing too hard. So he did something simple. He walked back to the counter, ordered an extra soda, and as he passed by the girls' table again, he quietly placed the drink in front of them. No pressure, no words. Then he returned to his own seat for a few seconds. The girls didn't move. The younger one glanced at the cup, then at her sister. The older girl didn't even acknowledge it. Keanu waited, but to his surprise, they didn't touch the drink. Fear not of hunger, not of thirst, fear of accepting something. A cold shiver ran down Keanu's spine. He glanced back at the employees. The manager quickly looked away. One of the kitchen workers wiped his hands on his apron, visibly uneasy. What the hell was going on here? Keanu knew he needed answers. He got up and walked over to the counter where a young cashier stood. "Hey, sorry to bother you, I just have a quick question." The cashier seemed nervous before Keanu even spoke. "Those girls over there?" Keanu gestured slightly in their direction. "Are they waiting for someone?" The cashier hesitated. His eyes darted toward the manager, who was now watching them closely. Then finally he answered, "They've been here since this morning." Keanu's stomach dropped. "Since this morning?" he repeated in disbelief in his voice. "And no one has come for them?" The cashier averted his eyes. He didn't want to talk about it, but Keanu already knew something was deeply wrong, and he wasn't leaving until he found out what it was. Keanu returned to his seat, but he couldn't relax anymore. Those girls had been here since the morning, alone, waiting for someone who never came. He glanced at them discreetly. The younger one fidgeted slightly, swinging her feet, while the older one kept her eyes locked on the crumpled piece of paper in her hands. What did that note say? And why were they holding on to it so tightly, as if it was the only thing they had? Keanu knew he couldn't force a conversation. They were already too scared. But there was another approach that might work. He decided to give them a choice. He leaned slightly toward them, keeping his voice low and calm. "If you want me to leave, I will." The older girl looked up for the first time. It was quick, just a second. But Keanu saw the conflict inside her. She wanted to say something, but she was afraid. The younger girl clutched her sister's arm even tighter, as if silently saying, "Don't say anything." Silence filled the space between them. Keanu didn't push. He just waited, and then he changed his strategy. "If they didn't want to talk, maybe I could ask about something less direct. Can I ask you something?" The older girl hesitated. "That paper, is it important?" This time, her expression shifted. She looked at the note, then at Keanu, as if trying to decide whether she could trust him. Finally, without saying a word, she slid the paper across the table. Keanu picked it up carefully as if it were something fragile. The paper was dirty and crumpled, as if it had been folded and held onto for a long time. Some of the words were smudged, but he could still make out the main message. "Wait to KFC. Don't leave. I will come for you, Mom." Keanu felt a tightness in his chest. These girls weren't lost. They were waiting. But for whom, and why had no one come? He looked up at the older girl, who was now holding her sister's hand. "Your mom told you to stay here," she nodded. "Did she say when she'd be back?" The girl hesitated. She looked at her sister, then at Keanu, and then in a soft whisper she said she'd be back soon. Keanu took a slow breath. Soon, but soon wasn't since the morning. Something was wrong, very wrong. Keanu felt a heaviness settle in his chest. The girl's mother had told them to wait, but if she had said she'd be back soon, why wasn't she here? Something didn't add up. He scanned the restaurant again. The employees still seemed uneasy, avoiding eye contact with both him and the girls. The manager, who had been watching earlier, now quickly looked away whenever Keanu met his gaze. They knew something, and Keanu was going to find out what. He stood up from his table and walked calmly to the counter. "Can I ask you something?" he said, keeping his voice low and composed. The cashier, a young man who couldn't have been older than 20, swallowed hard. "Sure, sir." Keanu gestured subtly toward the girls. "Does their mother work here?" The employee hesitated. Then he looked at the manager as if asking permission to speak. The manager let out a long sigh and gave a small nod. "Yes," the cashier finally admitted, his voice uneasy. "She works in the kitchen, but she didn't come in today." Keanu felt a chill creep up his spine. She missed her entire shift. The young man nodded, avoiding his gaze. "She never misses work," he murmured. But today she just didn't show up. Keanu turned back toward the girls. Their mother hadn't shown up for work, and yet before disappearing she had left them a note telling them to stay here. Why? The answer hit him like a weight, and it hurt. Keanu realized the truth. The mother knew something was wrong. She probably didn't know where to go. But the KFC was the only safe place she could think of. It was the only place where her daughters could stay without being forced out onto the streets, and maybe she had left that note hoping that someone would help them if she couldn't come back. Keanu closed his eyes for a moment, trying to process that thought. Then suddenly a cold sensation ran down his spine. He turned his head toward the window and saw a man standing across the street. The man wasn't moving. He was just watching the restaurant. His hands were tucked in his pockets, a cigarette burning between his lips, his face partially hidden in the shadows. But Keanu could feel it. This wasn't just a random passerby. Was this the stepfather? Was he waiting to see if the girls left the restaurant alone? Keanu took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. But now he knew this wasn't just a case of a mother running late. Something much darker was behind the story, and he wasn't going anywhere until he knew the truth. Keanu's eyes remained fixed on the man across the street. The stranger wasn't moving. He simply stood there, cigarette glowing in the dark, watching the restaurant with an unsettling stillness. Keanu knew that look, that kind of patience, wasn't normal. This man wasn't just loitering. He was waiting for something, and Keanu had a sickening feeling that he was waiting for the girls. I won't let that happen. Slowly, he turned back toward the girls. The older one still gripped the note, her fingers trembling slightly. The younger one, sensing something was wrong, clung to her sister's arm even tighter. They didn't know it, but they were in danger. Keanu had to do something. He stood up from his seat and walked back to the counter. The manager immediately stiffened. I need to use your phone, Keanu said. The manager hesitated. He didn't like this. Sir, we can't. Keanu's voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight. It wasn't a request. The manager exchanged a glance with one of the employees before sighing and nodding toward a phone near the registers. Keanu picked it up, keeping his voice low as he dialed. Hello, I need to speak with someone about 2 unattended children. They've been left in a restaurant since this morning. Their mother is missing. The dispatcher on the other end responded quickly, asking for details. Their mother works here but didn't show up for work. No one has come for them, and there's a man outside. His eyes flicked back to the window. The man was still there, waiting, watching. I think they're in danger. The dispatcher said they'd send someone over, but Keanu could hear it in their voice. They weren't treating this as an emergency. Please just send someone quickly, he pressed before hanging up. He turned back toward the girls, trying to keep his expression calm. They didn't need more fear. But just as he was about to walk back to them, the restaurant phone rang. A sudden ring made the employees jump. One of the workers hesitated before picking it up. KFC, how can I? She froze, her eyes widened, and then she looked straight at Keanu. It's for you. Keanu's heart dropped. Slowly, he walked over and took the receiver from her shaking hands. Hello? A voice came through the line. A woman's voice, shaky and out of breath. Please tell me they're still there. Keanu stiffened. It was their mother on the other end of the line. A frantic woman pleads, Please tell me they're still there. Keanu gripped the phone tighter, his knuckles turning white. The woman's voice on the other end trembled, heavy with fear and desperation. Please tell me they're still there. Keanu felt a tightness in his chest. The urgency in her voice was palpable, a mother's raw terror echoing through the fragile connection. They're here, he answered firmly. They're safe. A choked sob escaped from the other end of the line. Thank God. Keanu closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the ragged breathing on the other end. He could hear it in the way she exhaled. She was barely holding herself together. Are you their mother? He asked softly. A pause. Yes. Her answer came hesitantly, as if she was afraid to admit it, as if the very act of saying it aloud would shatter her already fragile state. Where are you? Keanu pressed. Static crackled over the line, mingled with the sound of hurried footsteps and labored breathing. "I'm close, but he's here too." Keanu immediately knew who she meant. Lifting his gaze, he turned his attention back to the restaurant window. Outside, through the faint reflection of dim lighting, he saw the man still standing there, a cigarette burned between his fingers, its ember glowing against the darkened street. His stance was unchanged, rigid, watchful, patient. This wasn't some random loiterer. He was waiting for them. Keanu's stomach churned, his pulse quickened. He couldn't let this man get to the girls. "Listen to me," he said, keeping his voice steady. "Come through the side door now." A pause. "Okay." Then the line went dead. The side door swung open. The woman rushed inside, her chest rising and falling rapidly, her breath coming in short gasps, as though she had run the last stretch. Her wild eyes darted across the restaurant, searching frantic until they landed on her daughters. She froze for a split second, her body refusing to move, as if her brain couldn't process what she was seeing. Then, "Girls!" The cry tore from her throat, raw with relief, fear, and love, all mixed into one uncontrollable burst of emotion. The two girls turned in unison. The younger one ran first, tiny feet pounding against the floor, as she threw herself into her mother's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. The older one hesitated just for a moment, as if she needed to be sure it was real. Then she ran too. The mother collapsed to her knees, pulling them in, wrapping them up in her arms, as her body shook with violent sobs. I thought I'd never see you again," she whispered into their hair, her voice breaking apart. The girls clung to her desperately, their tiny hands gripping at her clothing, their bodies trembling as they cried into her chest. Keanu stood back, watching, letting them have this moment. But he knew it wasn't over yet. After what felt like an eternity, the mother finally lifted her head, her eyes brimming with gratitude and exhaustion. She met Keanu's gaze. "Thank you," she whispered, "for staying with them." Keanu nodded. "What happened?" he asked, though he already suspected the answer. She swallowed hard, then, as if drawn by some invisible force, her eyes flicked toward the window and she saw him. Her entire body went rigid, her arms tightening around her daughters. "He wouldn't let me leave." Keanu's stomach twisted. He already knew, but hearing her say it made it feel more real, more monstrous. "Is he their stepfather?" he asked. She nodded, guilt flashing across her face. "I tried to do everything right. I planned to leave before he got home, but..." Her voice cracked. "He locked the door, told me if I left, I'd never see my kids again." Keanu exhaled slowly, trying to control the anger bubbling inside him. "How did you get out?" he asked, his voice low. She trembled, her hands shaking as she brushed a strand of hair from the younger girl's face. "I waited for him to fall asleep and climbed out the window." Keanu studied her, watching the way her fingers clutched at the girls, as if afraid they'd be ripped away from her again. She didn't want to go back. She couldn't go back. "Do you have anywhere to go?" he asked. She shook her head, eyes glistening with fresh tears. "No." Keanu didn't hesitate. He pulled out his phone and made one final call. "I need emergency assistance for a mother and 2 children in immediate danger." The voice on the other end understood instantly. "We're on our way." Keanu hung up and turned to the mother. "You're leaving tonight." She blinked, as if unsure she had heard him correctly. "But where?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "A safe place," Keanu assured her. "He won't find you." Her lips parted as if she wanted to argue, to say it wasn't possible. "I don't have money." "I don't worry about that," Keanu cut her off. "Just trust me." The woman broke down again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was relief. Minutes later, a black car pulled up outside the restaurant. A man, someone Keanu trusted, stepped out, gave him a nod. "Ready?" he asked. The mother looked at her daughters, then back at Keanu. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. Keanu gave her a small smile. "Just take care of them." She exhaled a deep, shaky breath, then climbed into the car, her daughters clinging tightly to her. The weight finally lifting from his chest, and the man outside, when he realized the girls were gone, flicked his cigarette to the ground, crushed it under his boot, and vanished into the shadows. Keanu knew this wasn't truly over, but for now they were safe, and that was all that mattered. As the mother and daughter stepped into the car, she reached for Keanu's hand. "You saved us tonight," she whispered. "They'll never forget this." Keanu squeezed her hand gently, and with that, the story of their escape had ended. But a new chapter of their lives had just begun. If you enjoyed this story, we have many more that will warm your heart. Click the screen to explore more stories of hope, compassion, and resilience. In case you did not watch my previous story, I will leave it here for you. Wish you enjoy it. On a lonely highway in the Nevada desert, Keanu Reeves stopped at a small gas station to refuel his motorcycle and grab a coffee. It was a place forgotten by time, where dust blended with the scent of old gasoline. A teen girl behind the counter seemed like just another exhausted figure at the end of a long day, but something in her eyes told a different story. It wasn't just the surprise of seeing that she was just a child, no older than 12. It was the invisible tension hanging in the air, the way her hands trembled as she handed back the change, the watchful eyes of the man keeping a close eye on her. When Keanu picked up the receipt and absent-mindedly turned it over, his body tensed. The handwritten words made his blood run cold. You won't believe how this story ends. It will keep you on edge from start to finish. Before we continue this story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel because tomorrow we have another special story for you. The road cut through the desert like a forgotten scar. The road cut through the desert like a forgotten scar. The heat made the asphalt shimmer under the setting sun, and Keanu felt the warm wind against his face as he rode his motorcycle. He liked empty roads, but this stretch of Nevada desert felt too empty. When he saw the only gas station for miles, he decided to stop. The flickering neon sign read Open 24H, though some letters were burned out, giving the place a rundown feel. He slowed down, parking next to the only working pump. The door to the mini-mart creaked open, and a young girl stepped out. Keanu immediately noticed something different. She was far too young to be out here alone. She was thin, her oversized uniform hanging loosely on her small frame. Her eyes were sunken, dark circles etched deep, and her shoulders seemed permanently hunched. She avoided making eye contact. "Good evening, sir. Fill up?" Her voice was soft, almost hesitant. Keanu nodded. "Full tank, please." She started fueling, but her hands were slightly trembling. Keanu didn't like that. Something felt off. The mini-mart door swung open again. A man stepped out. Matt. Tall, broad-shouldered, hard-faced. He said nothing. He just stood in the doorway watching. But Keanu noticed how the girl immediately dropped her gaze when he appeared. Matt never took his eyes off her. When the girl fumbled slightly with the gas nozzle, Matt's expression hardened. "You're taking too damn long." His voice was cold, sharp. The girl hurried immediately without looking up. Keanu saw that, and he didn't like it. After fueling up, Keanu decided to step into the mini-mart. The inside was cluttered and dimly lit, with shelves filled with expired products. The air smelled of stale coffee. The girl stood behind the counter, wearing the same vacant expression as before. Matt remained near the door, watching everything. "Just a coffee, please," Keanu said. She moved quickly, but her hands shook slightly, causing a few drops to spill. Matt let out an exaggerated sigh. "Jesus, can't even hold a damn cup right." She didn't respond, just grabbed a cloth and wiped up the spill as fast as possible. Keanu took his coffee, but something about that moment disturbed him deeply. When Keanu handed over his money, the girl hesitated for a split second before giving him his change. She didn't look him in the eye, but when their hands briefly touched, Keanu felt the faintest squeeze of her fingers. It was quick, almost unnoticeable, like she was trying to say something without words. Then, in a swift motion, she slid the receipt into his hand. Keanu took it without reacting. The girl immediately pulled back. Matt was still watching, and he looked suspicious. Outside, Keanu took a sip of his coffee as he walked to his bike. The desert was too quiet. He glanced at the receipt before stuffing it into his pocket, but as he folded it, he saw something handwritten on the back. "Help. Please, don't let him see this." Keanu's heart beat harder. He lifted his gaze and discreetly looked back at the mini-mart. The girl was inside now, standing behind the counter, her hands resting over her small frame. And then he noticed something even stranger. Matt was locking the door, slowly turning the key like he was sealing the place. Keanu felt his pulse quicken. He could simply ride away. But now he knew something was very wrong. The girl wasn't just trapped in this gas station. She was a prisoner, and Matt wasn't letting her go. Keanu couldn't just leave. He immediately lifted his eyes. Inside, she stood behind the counter, her hands instinctively placed over herself, the movement subtle, protective. And then for just a second she looked at him, but it was enough. That look didn't just ask for help, it begged. Keanu felt tension rise in his chest, and then the door to the mini-mart clicked audibly. He turned his head just in time to see Matt locking the door, sealing the place. The girl wasn't just trapped here, she was a hostage, and Matt wasn't letting her leave. This wasn't just coincidence. It was control. And Keanu couldn't just leave. He switched off his engine slowly, pretending to check something on his dashboard. But in reality, his eyes were analyzing everything around him. And now, he saw clearly. This place wasn't just some rundown gas station. It was a prison hiding in plain sight. He started noticing alarming details. Windows covered with newspapers blocking any view from outside. Only one working security camera pointed at the cash register, ignoring the rest of the store. The gas tank was never completely full. This place wasn't running like a real business. It was just a front, and the girl was part of it. He needed to stay calm. He couldn't just barge in and take her. If Matt had been controlling her this long, he wouldn't hesitate to take things further. Keanu moved to the side of the building, pretending to check his bike. And then, he heard it. A muffled noise, like something being knocked over. And a moment later, a short, sharp scream. The girl. The decision was made in that instant. Keanu wasn't leaving without her. He heard the muffled noise again, followed by the short scream, forcing him to take immediate action. He didn't hesitate. He moved quickly to the side of the mini-mart, testing the side door handle. Unlocked. That was strange. If Matt was so controlling, why leave a side entrance unsecured? Maybe he never expected anyone to have the guts to come in. Keanu pushed the door open slowly, slipping inside without making a sound. The smell hit him first. Old oil, dust, a place that should have been clean for customers but was clearly neglected. This didn't feel like a legitimate business. It was something else, and now Keanu needed to figure out what. The shelves were messy, as if no one really cared about organization. The products were expired, some by months. That meant the gas station wasn't really there to sell gas and groceries. It was just a cover for something bigger. As Keanu moved past the shelves, he heard something, a noise coming from a slightly open door in the back. He stopped, holding his breath. He stepped closer and peeked inside. That's when he saw it. The girl. She was sitting on a dirty mattress, a light chain around her ankle. Her eyes widened when she saw Keanu, but before she could say anything, she raised a finger to her lips. Silence. Keanu immediately understood. She couldn't call for help. She wasn't just an employee. She was a prisoner. Keanu clenched his fists slowly. Matt wasn't just controlling her. He had stolen her identity, her documents, her freedom. And from the way she trembled, he had hurt her before. Keanu moved closer, slowly. The girl spoke fast and low. Please, you have to leave. He'll be back soon. Keanu looked at the chain on her ankle. Does he always keep you like this? She nodded, tears forming in her eyes. He took me months ago. I tried to run, but she looked down at her arms. Bruises. Keanu felt a weight in his chest. This girl wasn't just a victim of abuse. She was being held against her will. And Matt didn't seem like the kind of man who would let this go easily. Keanu reached into his pocket, pulling out a small knife. Stay quiet. He crouched down, starting to cut through the chain. Then, heavy footsteps behind him. Keanu knew instantly. Before he could turn around, Matt's voice echoed through the room. What the hell do you think you're doing? Keanu stood up slowly. Matt was standing in the doorway, gripping something at his waist, a hunting knife. He was smiling. A cold, cruel smile. "You shouldn't have gotten involved." He didn't have time to finish unlocking the girl's chain. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Keanu slowly rose to his feet, preparing for the inevitable. Matt stood in the doorway, blocking the exit, gripping a hunting knife. His face didn't show rage. It showed control. That meant only one thing. He had done this before, and worse, he believed he could do it again. Matt let out a slow, casual laugh, adjusting his grip on the knife. "Did you really think you could just walk into my store and walk out like nothing happened?" Keanu didn't answer. He knew what Matt wanted. A reaction. He wanted to see fear. He wanted Keanu to play his game. But Keanu didn't play games. He stood his ground, waiting. Matt continued, "Let me guess, you think you're saving her, right?" He glanced at the girl and chuckled. "Because so far she hasn't said a damn word." The girl held her breath, frozen. Keanu could feel her eyes on him. She trusted him, but at the same time she feared what Matt might do. Matt stepped closer. The knife caught the dim light, glinting like a warning. "I've seen guys like you before, meddling where they don't belong, thinking they're some kind of hero." But in the end, he tilted the blade toward Keanu. "They walk out of here in worse shape than when they came in." Keanu still didn't react because he was waiting for something. The sound of sirens. But it wasn't time yet. He needed to stall Matt a little longer. Matt turned to the girl. "Tell him, do you want to leave with this guy?" She didn't answer. Her eyes were locked on the knife. Matt sighed, shaking his head. "See, she doesn't want to go." Keanu noticed the confidence in Matt's voice. He wasn't in a rush. That meant Matt thought he had complete control over the situation. And that meant he wasn't prepared to lose. Keanu could use that against him. He relaxed his body, exhaling slowly. "Okay." Matt narrowed his eyes. "What?" Keanu took a small step back, opening his hands. "If you say she wants to stay, then I'll leave." Matt hesitated. This wasn't what he expected. "That's right," Keanu continued, taking another step back. "Looks like I wasted my time here." Matt relaxed, and in that moment, Keanu moved. With a sudden burst of speed, Keanu grabbed the nearest chair and shoved it into Matt. Matt stumbled backward. It was enough. Keanu lunged, striking Matt's arm, knocking the knife away. Matt tried to recover. He swung at Keanu, landing a glancing punch to his face. But Keanu was ready. He dodged and brought Matt down with a precise strike. Matt hit the floor hard, gasping for air. Keanu grabbed the knife from the floor. He looked at the girl. "Grab the keys and get out of here." She hesitated, still shaking. But then Matt laughed. Even after everything, he still thought he was in control. "You think this is over?" Keanu didn't respond. He simply glanced at his watch. 30 seconds left. Matt noticed the look on Keanu's face. And then, outside, sirens. Matt froze. Keanu exhaled slowly. "I called the cops the second I heard her scream." Matt tried to move. He knew he couldn't afford to be caught. But Keanu held him down. The sirens grew louder. Red and blue lights flashed outside. The girl began to cry, but this time, it wasn't fear. It was relief. Matt glared at Keanu with hatred. "You ruined everything." Keanu held his gaze firm. "You ruined yourself." The red and blue lights from the police cars flashed against the cracked asphalt of the gas station. Officers stepped out of their vehicles, weapons drawn, prepared for anything. Keanu raised his hands, making it clear the threat had already been neutralized. Matt lay on the ground, his breath heavy, his eyes filled with hatred. As the officers approached him, he didn't fight back. He knew he had lost. 2 officers yanked him to his feet, swiftly handcuffing him, while another turned to the girl. She was sitting on the ground, hugging her knees, her whole body still shaking. "Miss, are you injured?" One officer asked, his voice calm but firm. She didn't answer at first. She just shook her head as if she didn't even know how to start processing everything. Keanu, still standing nearby, noticed how pale she looked. Her hands, still cradling, her small body trembled slightly. Keanu had seen trauma before. This wasn't just exhaustion. It was the weight of everything she had endured. He crouched beside the girl, meeting her gaze. For a moment, she just stared at him. "It's over." His voice was calm, reassuring. Her lips quivered as if trying to say something, but no words came out. She slowly turned to look at Matt. Even handcuffed, he was still trying to intimidate her. His stare was dark, burning with unspoken threats. But this time, she didn't look away. For the first time, he no longer had power over her. She inhaled deeply, the kind of breath someone takes when they've been holding it in for far too long. The officers led Matt toward one of the patrol cars, his boots scraping against the pavement as they pushed him forward. She watched in silence. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she could breathe. But deep inside, she knew this wasn't the end. It never was. "You don't have to know right now." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I don't know if I can be normal again." After a few minutes, an officer handed the girl a bottle of water. She accepted it, but her hands were still trembling. Keanu noticed. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to." She looked at him. She wanted to talk, because Keanu was the first person to really see what was happening. She took a deep breath, and then she started. "I'm from Kansas." Keanu stayed silent, just listening. "My mom died when I was 7. My dad never recovered." She frowned, as if recalling painful memories. "He started drinking, and when he drank, he changed." Her fingers gripped the water bottle tightly. "By the time I was 11, I knew I had to leave. I spent years trying to figure out how." She let out a weak laugh. "When I turned 12, I took everything I had and bought a bus ticket to Las Vegas. I thought I'd get a job. I thought things would get better." Her laugh faded, quickly. "I was so naive." She hesitated. This part was harder to say. "I made some bad choices." Keanu didn't react, just listened. "I met people who acted like they wanted to help, but they didn't." Her breathing hitched slightly. "I found myself in the streets, homeless." Keanu clenched his jaw but kept his expression neutral. "You were left alone." She nodded. "No money, no place to stay, no one to turn to." Her hands instinctively gripped her arms, as if protecting herself. "That's when Matt found me." She turned toward the gas station, as if staring at a ghost. "He saw me at a diner, said I looked tired, that he could help me." Keanu already knew where this was going, but he let her finish. "At first, I believed him." She let out a shaky breath. "But then, he took my ID." She paused, swallowing hard. "That same night, he locked the door for the first time." Silence. Then, she looked down at her hands. "I don't know what to do." Keanu followed her gaze. "You don't have to know right now." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I don't know if I can be normal again." Keanu's tone was steady. "That's your decision, no one else's." Her eyes blinked, glossy with unshed tears. For the first time, someone wasn't telling her what she should do. She finally had a choice. Hours later, Keanu stood outside the police station. The sun was rising, casting a golden glow over the quiet streets. The girl stepped out of the front doors, now wearing clean clothes provided by the officers. She looked tired, but for the first time, she looked free. She saw Keanu by his motorcycle and smiled softly. "So where are you headed now?" Keanu shrugged. "Just following the road." She nodded. He reached into his jacket and handed her something, an envelope. She opened it and saw money inside. "Keanu, I can't take this." He gave her a knowing smile. "Yes, you can." Her fingers gripped the envelope tightly. "What do I do now?" Keanu met her gaze. "Whatever you want. You're free." Keanu placed his helmet on and got on his bike. "Are you going to be okay?" She smiled. "Yeah." Before leaving, he looked at her one last time. "Be free." The wind blew, carrying with it the receipt. The one with the message, "Help." Now it was no longer a cry for help. It was proof that someone had listened and made a difference. If you enjoyed this story, we have many more that will warm your heart. Click the screen to explore more stories of hope, compassion, and resilience.